liked the idea of controlling the brain functions with radiomagnetic waves, so when a politician stood up to make a speech, you zap him, and he either shits his pants or whips out his meat and masturbates in front of the electorate. How to win votes and influence people.
Here's how it works. Contributions based on your earnings, made regularly by you and millions of your fellow workers. These contributions are collected by the federal government.
He quit tattooing, I think, in the early 50s. I believe it was in protest against the IRS because he was so pissed off that he had to pay a lot of taxes, and he said, screw it, I'm not going to work for the government. He was extremely anti-government. He was a real strong right-wing libertarian. So he told me that as just a protest against paying taxes, he didn't want to work, as he put it, for nothing. During those years, I think he did a variety of things when he stopped tattooing, and one of them, he was skippering one of these tour boats. I think they might have been like huge catamarans that took tourists around. He told me terrific stories of working in the shipyards, and he said he'd get back to his rooming house and there were guys lined up outside wanting a tattoo, probably other shipyard workers, and he'd have to go up the back stairway and try to sneak in because he was completely exhausted from working all day, and try to get into his room and get some shut-eye before he could grab him and say, come on, just put another one on me.
In the Navy Yard, I thought I had a steel splinter in my ass, as it used to catch on my clothes. I went to the sick bay where they pulled it out with a big magnet. And there it was, my old tattoo needle, big as hell.
Aloha means both farewell and greetings, and Hawaii bids farewell to 40 years of frustration and failure in attempts to win statehood, and joyously greets its new status as a full-fledged member of the Union, its 50th state. Hawaiian statehood gives the lie to communist charges of American colonialism. The big day was a long time in coming, which means that much more to celebrate.
And then eventually he got back into tattooing in, I think, 1960. There was a guy named Bob Palm who had opened this shop on Smith Street, 1033 Smith. I think Bob made him a partner in the shop, and then Bob had to leave the islands.
Bob got in trouble. Bob was a homosexual, and in those days, it wasn't cool to be gay, and it certainly wasn't cool to get caught in some kind of love nest with some Marines. If you screwed up in Honolulu, they'd take you to the airport, put you on a plane. Jerry bought the place really cheap.
For I think $1, like a token thing. Then it became the Sailor Jerry Tattoo Shop, and this is where he really made his mark on tattoo history.
Okay, I met Sailor Jerry at 1033 Smith Street in Hawaii. I was a sailor on the LT 2080. I became an apprentice there with Jerry. He helped me out quite a bit. Gave me 2 tattoo machines. What else did you need? The shop was just a little teeny dive. It really was. It was off of the main drag of Honolulu, Hawaii.
There was a huge titty bar that took up the whole bottom floor. So that was our waiting room, kind of. Strippers would be up there stumbling around high on reds and stuff. God, it was a mess, man.
It was flash, every corner that could be flashed.
It was just big enough for 2 stations.
It was very, very tight.
That was the shop. That was Sailor Jerry's.
By re-entering it, I think that he kind of reassessed what could be done with tattooing, and whereas he painted all this gorgeous flash, done terrific, solid tattoos on people in the real folk Americana tradition. One thing that was very important about Jerry is that his attention to detail, his precision, the fact that he researched them nuts and bolts of like mechanical things, of like the Navy symbolism. Twin screws, it was a classic like joke tattoo that guys would have tattooed on their ass. He sent me this drawing of it, or maybe even a stencil of this thing, twin screws, 40 knots, no smoke, twin screws, stand clear. And then he would put a notation on there about these must rotate in a certain direction. It was like the ships, the rigging had to be right.
Probably the only tattooers I ever met that knew what all that stuff was when he tattooed it. He was light years ahead of most of the tattooers of his time.
Tattooing in those days was basically black, red, green, and yellow. Jerry was the one that discovered purple as a tattoo pigment.
Where in the hell is he getting purple ink?
You were really in with Jerry if he gave you a little touch of purple to take home with you, here it is. You ever tell anybody about this, you're dead. You know, I'll never even talk to you again. You'll be shut out of the loop, you know.
This guy Lou Norman, who he always loved to torture.
He had a porn shop and a tattoo shop.
Lou Norman, who loved to get on TV, he'd get on there and yappity and go, and the only color that you'll never be able to get is purple. So Jerry started writing pigment companies for samples of purples. Finally, he hit on this stuff called Carbasol Violet. Now, you'd think that the guy was developing it because he wanted to have purple in his palette. But what he really wanted to do was he put a big purple dragon on a kid on his forearm, and then had the kid go over to Lou Norman's shop after it was healed up with the long sleeve shirt on and go, I want to get a purple dragon on, you know, and Lou Norman go, man, you can't get purple, it's too poison, blah, blah, blah. And he went, I got one here.
Lou Norman actually had the stroke over this purple ink. So Jerry has a good idea. He gets 24 purple orchids and has them sent to the hospital to Lou Norman's. It almost killed him in the hospital. He was a really, oh, he was just so full of pranks.
You know, he had these vendettas against a lot of tattooers, and, you know, it went beyond not just appreciating or giving any credence to their tattoo style.
Locally, he hated Lou Norman worse than anybody.
He claimed that Lou would always come around and be like big-eyeing his stuff. Oh my God, Jerry, how do you get that red in your flash?
Jerry told him, well, no, I'm using the same one you are, but I add sugar to the watercolor to make it, he says it makes it more bright. Norman goes back to the shop, paints the red in on all the sheets, leaves the shop, comes back the next morning, all the red's been eaten off the flash by the cockroaches.
In Honolulu there, I guess they have these big cockroaches.
They'll come right at you like, you know, they attack.
Nobody knew anything about tattooing. Tattooing was so subculture and so like spooky, and, you know, it really, I mean, the intricate levels of bullshit and stories and stuff are part of the great thing about it. But there's a great tat story. Tats would do these things with everybody's working in a sponge and a bucket then. You know, they didn't change needles or anything. They didn't change ink. And somebody get in the chair and they'd say, is this sterile? And Tats would say, sterile, of course. And take this Lucky, you know, out of his mouth or something, dip it in there, psst, you know, he said, see that? It sterilizes that water, you know.
Nobody wore gloves in those days.
You're up to your elbows in blood and gore every day, man. No rubber gloves or any of that bullshit, man.
This fucking thing hurt, man. Wash it with alcohol. Wash it with alcohol. Ah, wash it with alcohol. I licked my arm. Oh, I looked at it. Oh.
The thing with Jerry was getting onto the sterile chain of events. When we went out of the dark ages of tattooing, which meant using the same tubes and needle bars and ink on everybody that came in the door over and over and over. We all knew, including Jerry at the time, that this was wrong. And the old school guys who during the 60s were in their 40s, 50s, and 60s weren't about to change.
Before Jerry, everybody's tattoos got a big scab on them, like an oatmeal cookie, and it took a month for them to heal up.
It's not a sanitized thing, so some of it's, you know, too bad. It's not like I long for the days when things weren't sterile, but it's just, it's very, very funny. It has this rich history of that thing, you know. He was a self-taught guy, an autodidact.
He was a real smart kind of a guy, kind of a nerd in a way, certain nerd qualities about him. He built me a power supply one time. We're gonna pick you up on the power supply. So he built all these diodes and crap, you know, and it was all mounted in pieces of aluminum and kind of taped together. It looked like a bomb. I used to have a lot of trouble bringing it on airplanes.
He was super interested in electronics, and then with the computers were just starting to the dawning of the age of computer. Who knows what would have happened if Jerry would have lived into, you know, an ancient age. He would have been so into all this cyber technology because he found it fascinating.
Just called the radio talk show and told them about an article I read in the Intellectual Digest about computerizing sex. You can just go into Cyber Sex Studio anywhere in the world, put your favorite girl's tape in the machine, connect up the censored devices, and you are in business. so you can see and hear what you are screwing via electronics. I would have figured this out, but somebody beat me to the punch. More money in this than heroin. Dial a cunt. Instant fuck service.
So Jerry had this radio show, all-night talk show, and I don't know how he wangled his way into it.
It was called Old Ironsides.
Jerry stayed on, I believe, from like midnight until maybe 4 in the morning.
I don't know when he slept.
And he would just talk all night, and people would call in. And I think maybe he'd play a little music, but mainly it was his political rant and reading his poetry and that stuff. He was a terrific raconteur. He could tell stories and he could relate with people on tons of different levels. And it was amazing to see him switch gears. You know, every other word was goddamn it and fuck this and yeah, cocksucker. And then he gets on the air and he had a really deep, beautiful air voice, terrific voice, and gets into this smooth delivery, you know, for all these whatever lonely widows out there in the dark. He was amazing, a real chameleon, a social chameleon.
This is Veterans Day, but this is also a day when we as Americans should take a good look into the mirror of our consciousness. Take a good look at what you see and remember it forever. Remember those who are responsible for the humiliation of our great nation in the eyes of the world today. We, as a nation, are riding on the heavily burdened backs of our fighting men. They are not complaining. I am.
Jerry was this extreme conservative, extreme right-winger.
He's the only guy I ever met that hated Nixon because Nixon was too liberal. I mean, he was really into all that America First kind of stuff, man. Love it or leave it.
A lot of his ideals, a lot of what he wanted to do, attitudes toward people, toward colonialism, toward all kinds of stuff that were prevalent at the late 19th century, essentially.
He chased more than one hippie out of there. I had to, kind of clean up the first time I went over there.
And I tell you, friends, we'll never be able to call this country our own until it's a country without. Without what? Yeah, without what?
Communism. Its basic godless philosophy.
I think he actually bought some land in some remote island group way the hell out in the Pacific and I'm gonna get away from all these liberals and all these commies and all this stuff and these kinds of people.
Now you know them. You know what they stand for. And it's up to you and me to fight them.
Hey, that fella's talking about me.
So the idea being he was going to get a big power boat. He's going to arm it with a quad 50 gun. This is Sailor Jerry's story telling me this now. And what he wanted to do was attack and raid the pirate boats that were coming down to the islands and overpowering the pearl divers. This blew my mind.
And you just listen to this stuff and you should buy land there and you're going, yeah, okay, gee, what was the name of that place, you know? So it was a weird thing. He'd been out there on this rock, and so it was easy to get a worldview going that maybe wasn't as informed as if you were connected either in a geographical or an intellectual sense or an informed sense with the way the rest of the world operated.
They call it Asiatic fever. That's, you have a 1,000-yard stare on a 100-yard island.
I mean, a lot of tattooers probably shared his outlook in that, let's face it, most of these guys were terrible racists, either overtly or covertly, more overtly. It's the way America was in those days, and it wasn't exactly drawing from a sophisticated, educated class of people, you know. They might have been smart, had street smarts, but they also were ferociously protective of their independent status. One reason Jerry hated Burt Grimm is because Burt was he loved publicity. Jerry absolutely shunned publicity. He would throw people out of his shop. We're doing a little article on tattooing as a human interest. Get out, get the fuck out, you know. And whereas Burt knew the value of publicity, and he would ham it up, and he'd get the St. Louis papers to write him up.
Well, a lot of the old tattoo artists, the old school, from my school, I guess I was the new school then, you know, but I knew how to spell it, though. They spell it S-K-O-O-L nowadays. They had the mentality of hiding up a dark, dirty street and keeping as low a profile as possible. And in that way, the big bad boogeyman, like the legislators or something, they wouldn't find you to outlaw.
He had this huge vendetta against Lyle Tuttle. Lyle really was a disciple of Burt. He picked it because they're both like quintessential flim-flam guys, and I say that with respect.
You see that little there's a little blush right there.
Yeah.
That's the head of my dick. News editors would send a writer out, probably to dig up some dirt, who knows, but they would go out and talk to the tattoo artist. Discovered a guy down next to the Greyhound bus station that wasn't up a dark, dirty alley, hiding and keeping a low profile, but somebody that was the opposite.
He would diss Lyle for his kind of his lifestyle, you know, in San Francisco, this, you know, hotbed of liberalism and
everybody's favorite city. And the hippies decide to congregate there, right?
Tuttle and all these weirdos in San Francisco. I was terrified the whole time I wrote to Jerry. I thought, if he finds out that I'm a pothead, man, it's never, you know, he'll never talk to me again, you know.
If Johnson had been up there and he'd had 2 big tattoos on his forearm with his sleeves rolled up, given the Bay of Tompkins resolution, those hippies wouldn't have touched tattooing with a 10-foot pole. So I've always considered myself a product of timing. At the right time, the right guy at the right place at the right time. And then plus being tattooed all over. That was the selling point. I believed in my product.
Lyle had been on the cover of Rolling Stone, and Jerry went ballistic. He hated Rolling Stone because he hated the hippie thing. Jerry's toilet was really bad. And inside the lid, he pasted that photo of Lyle. And he took a photo of it and sent it to me. So he said, every time I piss, I'm pissing on Lyle Tuttle.
The Lyle Turtle article makes me want to puke, too. He's in with the lefties, the pot pushers, the sensitivity trainers, and the rest of the un-American faction. It proves one point that the majority of the people are visually crippled and don't know art from shit.
In the old days, there maybe were 6 or 8 people that Jerry really respected and worshipped, and he had all this oral history in his head. He began developing more ambitious projects and had some contacts actually through a Japanese man who would travel through Hawaii. Mr. Kida was bringing Jerry photos from some of the famous Tokyo tattoo artists. There were no pictures of Japanese work available. It was very, very hard to see any of this stuff, but Jerry kind of had an in there.
Jerry began corresponding with the Japanese tattoo masters, known as Horis. Soon, he was trading tattoo information with the famous Horiyoshi II and Horihide Kazugo Agori.
All the Japanese tattooers have an honorific term of hori, to dig or to carve. Jerry was actually hori smoku, kind of a fake honorific. An idea of like a Japanese that couldn't say the L would say holy smoke, hori smoku. So it was like a dig, you know, at the Japanese, and also a way to give himself like a kind of a fake honorific, you know.
He really got down on the Asian thing.
Horiyoshi was real cloistered. He figured that what he did was not the same thing as the rest of these tattoo artists did in Japan. And his work was fucking insane. He could really tattoo. He wouldn't have anything to do with those guys, but did he ever like Jerry? He saw some of Jerry's work and he saw color like he'd never seen before.
Japan has the right answer. You don't just walk in, lay your money down, and get tattooed. They have to study your character first. And if they don't think you'll be a credit to the work they put on you, they turn you down cold. That's the way I'm taking it.